Okay, well, we are going to get started. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. And thank you for attending the I.C.E.'s Public Member Networking Call for the Ben Shimberg Lecture. My name is Grace Calloway, and I'll be serving as your technical support for today's conversation. If you have any issues, please send me a private chat and I will follow up. A few ground rules for our conversation. If it is possible, we ask for you to turn on your camera. We ask for yourself to mute yourself if you are not actively speaking. We are going to do a Q&A at the end, so if you have something to say, please raise your hand and Becky or Tara will call on you. And if you're more comfortable using the chat, you are also welcome to use that feature as well. Finally, this conversation will be recorded. If you have any concerns regarding this, please feel free to send me a chat. We have an hour scheduled and will not go over that time, but if our conversation comes to a natural close before that, we will end early. And with that, I will now pass it over to our I.C.E.'s Public Member Committee Chair, Becky Lagoon.
Thank you, Grace, and welcome everybody. It's nice to see a large group in attendance. In the invitation you received to register for this Zoom, there was a little bit of information about the Ben Shimberg Public Service Award. Ben was an icon in the world of credentialing and regulation. And when he worked for the Educational Testing Service, he got very interested in licensing and certification. And he wrote a great deal about the public service mission, about the importance of accountability, and about the value of public members. And Ben was the first chairman of the board of the Citizen Advocacy Center, which was created in the 1980s to be a resource and networking opportunity for public members on healthcare licensing and certifying organizations. And when he died, the Ben Shimberg Public Service Award was created in his memory. And it honors an individual whose career and activities epitomize Ben's principles of public service, accountability, and public membership. I.C.E. has taken over the annual Ben Shimberg Public Service Award from CAC and given the responsibility for administering it to the Public Service, to the Public Member Committee, which is your host today. In the invitation, you also read a little bit about Tara Montgomery, who is the 2023 recipient of the Shimberg Award and today's speaker. Tara is a distinguished advisor, academician, social entrepreneur, and her resume says that her ambitious goal is to, quote, connect the dots between healthy people and healthy democracies, bringing consumer and citizen perspectives to conversations about culture change in healthcare and other complex systems. And Tara actually manages to do those things. She's no stranger to public membership. She's just retired as a public member of the board of directors of the American Board of Medical Specialties, where she chaired the public member caucus. And she was also a member of the executive committee and the committee on ethics and professionalism at ABMS. And I have some personal experience with the power of Tara's mind and her conviction. We were together members of a consortium of consumer advocates whose comments on ABMS's proposed new standards for continuing certification, our comments of this consumer consortium actually had an impact on the final product. So it's a tremendous pleasure for me to introduce to you Tara Montgomery.
Thank you so much, Becky and Grace. I'm really honored to be here and really happy to see at least 6 familiar faces. That makes me feel a lot better about this moment and talking to all of you. I'm going to just switch to my slides to share. I'm going to be going along with slides today, so just give me a moment. Okay. So I'm talking today about public members as change leaders. I almost didn't want to give this talk today because I watched John Oliver on Sunday. I don't know if any of you did, but he did an incredible 30-minute, just right for the Shimberg lecture, expose on state medical boards and the role of public members, actually. And I encourage everyone to take a look at that, as well as listening to me for the next 30 minutes. But I think actually John Oliver is an amazing public advocate, public interest advocate, perhaps holding the legacy of others. So it's been, let me just move on. It's been 7 years since I left Consumer Reports, 5 to 6 years since I've been involved in the boards community. I'm going to talk today more about the specialty medical boards, but I think my remarks apply to state medical boards, to boards that are not doctors, but other medical professions and perhaps other professions. So keep that in mind, that my experience is more around the specialty boards. I have been working solo independently now for 7 years, and I really formed my identity as a consumer advocate or public interest advocate at Consumer Reports. I also got to know the boards community during that time because I worked with the ABIM Foundation on Choosing Wisely and the launch of their Choosing Wisely campaign that became pretty influential in medicine in the decade that followed. But what I really learned at Consumer Reports was about the value of trust, of truth, and transparency. And those values are really embedded in everything I've done since. Even though I'm not associated with that brand, I kind of carry it wherever I go with a lot of pride. But that was a big institution, Consumer Reports. You know, we reached tens, if not 100 million consumers a year. Then I became just me, just Tara, sitting in my apartment in New York, trying to keep the work going. And I really wanted to do that. I was curious about following this consumer agenda in a more independent way, but also a bit daunted. And I went and did a master's degree at University of Oxford and HEC Paris on change leadership. So consulting and coaching change leaders, which is why I called my talk Change Leaders. What I learned, among many things in that talk, was about the use of self. And I think where my talk here today is different from any of the previous ones that I've heard and read, is those talks often talk about the work. And of course, the work is the most important thing. But I'm really interested in who does the work and what we can do as individuals, as selves, to bring about change in systems and in medicine. So in some ways, I'll be talking about me, but I do that with great humility because I want to help you think about yourselves and all of us as individuals and what we bring as individuals to the work that we do. Also, when I read the previous 20 talks, which I did do, and it's worth doing, they're remarkable, I noticed most of those winners are policy people. They're leaders, they're lawyers, they're credentialing experts. I come, as I said, more solo. I don't have institutional support right now. But I think that my own evolution kind of mirrors the story I want to tell in this talk about how things are changing. Next slide. There are some familiar names that I want to bring up today as I think about the past and the present and the future of leadership. So one, of course, is Ben Shimberg. And I wanted to remember him today with you because last fall, when I was awarded the Ben Shimberg Award, it was the 20th anniversary of his death. And he, of course, had such an impact, I didn't want to not acknowledge him today. And there are others. David Swankin. 20 years after Ben died, we also lost David Swankin in August 2023. And as Becky has written, the impact Consumer Advocacy Center has had on health professional regulation and credentialing is in no small measure due to the commitment and creativity of David. So thank you, David. And lastly, I want to note Sydney Wolfe. Actually, Sid was mentioned in the John Oliver episode that I talked about earlier. He died on January 1st of this year. And I looked at his obituary, and I'm going to read it to you because I think we all need to carry this. For half a century, Sid taught so much to all of us, myself very much included, how to be strategically creative and innovative, how to translate expertise into policy talk, and even more importantly, public messaging, how to use the media to disseminate information and demand change, how to do research and maintain standards of excellence, the need to insist on accountability, how to operate with integrity and fearlessness, the power of persistence and never giving up, how to stay motivated for the long haul, why passion makes a difference, and never to accept injustice. So of course, Sydney Wolfe was a Shimberg Award winner. And in that talk that he gave in 2009, he gave us as public members a particular responsibility to speak up, just as he always did. And in that way, he's a legend among us as advocates. So my talk, public members as change leaders. I wanted to reflect a little bit on the past and the public members and the players in advocacy for health in the past 50 years, really. And then look a little bit at the present, say 2016 to 2024, and then look at where we're going into the future. So once upon a time, the consumer movement unified us. So that was really, in the 20th century post-war, and especially in the 1970s, for the past 50 years, it was really the heyday for consumer advocacy. And that consumer advocacy was rooted in organizations. Some familiar names on this slide that some of us are part of, have been part of, consumers and citizens, patients and families. And some of the leaders of these organizations were very well known. Household names, progressive rebels, household and trusted authority figures. And one giant among those was John Rother. In 2006, he won the Shimberg Award. And he, from AARP, really represented something important that maybe we're losing a little, which was nonpartisanship, but also a strong commitment to the public interest and an ability to bring people together around that vision. The groups that were involved in this weren't necessarily that diverse, I have to say, but they were unified. And they were working really in parallel to other work in patient advocacy, but John Rother, of course, worked as a big voice in I.C.E. and in change of the healthcare system. He advocated for Medicare reform. He promoted public participation on regulatory and oversight bodies as a way to improve healthcare and safety, and supported training and networking of public members to enhance our effectiveness. So AARP was at the heart of these coalitions until one day, the social fabric began to fray. So these words are familiar to all of us. We've been through them, we're still living through them, and they're relevant to our work, so I'm reminding us of them right now. In the past 7 years, those same 7 years that I've been independent, systems have become more complex. At Oxford, I learned the phrase TUNA, T-U-N-A, turbulent, uncertain, novel, and ambiguous. That's the world we live in today. I have to say, Donald Trump was a big catalyst for some of this, but not only him. And there were other turning points, like the Black Lives Matter moments in 2020. So much has happened in these 7 years, if you think about the culture change that we're all going through. But along with that, there's a lot of fragility, especially in terms of conflicts of interest and public accountability and ethics. And I was noticing in one of the previous Shimberg talks, something that I think is still more true than ever around conflict of interest. So Julianne D'Angelo-Felmeth, if I pronounce her name correctly, was administrative director of the Center for Public Interest Law at the University of San Diego School of Law and the former enforcement monitor for the Medical Board of California. And she highlighted independence in these words. So the social fabric has begun to fray. And because of that, trust has been eroded. Trust is something I've been focused on so much in my years of consulting and coaching and work with the boards. It's what we're living with now. The challenges to institutional legitimacy, the burnout that all healthcare professionals, but also patients and advocates are experiencing, the erosion of civil rights, the lack of funding to support many of the things that we're trying to fight for, declines and attacks on consumer protection, declines, which I was reading an article about the other day, in volunteerism. People are exhausted and tired and feel this uncertainty and so on that I talked about, and don't necessarily have it inside them to volunteer as much as they did anymore. We've also seen through some research recently published that funding of the kind of work we do has also been declining and being directed often at very important things, but not so much at consumer advocacy and patient advocacy. So this is a hard environment for us to work in. There's also, of course, the issues of misinformation surfacing and the legislative and political interference in the practice of medicine that many of us are dealing with. So much decline, so many challenges. So where are the trusted messengers in this, the truth tellers? There are two of them from ProPublica. Charles Alstein and Tracy Weber from ProPublica won the Shimberg Award in 2014. They really understood the role of a public member. You see things that members of the profession may not see. You have to feel free to speak up and ask why. They're investigative journalists, they're truth tellers, and they're calling on us to be that. I think John Oliver is actually working in that tradition as well. So trust was eroded, institutions weakened, and consumer power has become decentralized. And because of that, individuals have been stepping up to the plate. I am one of them. Many of you are probably some of them. And who do we represent these days when we're not part of these big institutions whose legacy we carry? Are we rebels? Are we outsiders? Are we change makers from the inside? Are we really entitled to say we speak for the public interest? We're divided into so many subcultures now, different perspectives as individuals. The subcultures really interest me. I know a lot of different kinds of patient advocates. I know patient and family advisors and advocates like Grace Conovado, e-patients who work on health data, privacy, AI like Andrea Downing, participatory medicine participants like Liz Salmi, who's a founder of Open Notes, a patient herself, citizen scientists like Letitia Brown James, who worked with patients like me and figured out how to deal with her epilepsy, patient safety advocates like Christian John Lillis, who are motivated by the death of his mother, who was motivated by the death of his mother to start a foundation to fight C. difficile. So these subcultures and these incredible people exist. But we don't necessarily all know each other or talk to each other. So these individuals, we have stepped up. Many of us are on the medical specialty boards, and I just wanted to feature what we had accomplished, especially at ABMS and in our world, and some of the challenges. So at ABMS, with a lot of input, even pressure from public members, and the community that Becky mentioned in my introduction around the patient advocates that provided comments during the commenting period for the ABMS standards, we helped improve those standards for continuing certification. We've been in the room championing health equity, professionalism, and transparency. We've been encouraging the boards to address misinformation and helping them keep legislative and political interference at the top of their agenda. So all of these rockstar public members, many of you are on the call right now, have been part of that, and thank you. And we have managed to work together. But the challenge is, how do we define and represent the public interest in 2024? It's sort of an interesting, problematic question when there are a lot of people, probably not in this room, who would define it really differently from us. And when we think about our legitimacy to speak for it, we have to be humble and think, what is the right thing to do when we don't represent the public per se? We can never make that claim. Yet the public interest does mean something. So how do we define it? We also have to be humble that if you look like me, you're not representative of society. We have to go beyond ourselves and reach out, invite other people into the room, invite voices, or remind people in the room that not every voice is there. We also have the challenge that we don't have strong institutional support, even just sort of philosophically or morally. We don't have that infrastructure. We don't have all of that power behind us like I had at Consumer Reports. There are also some barriers to participation for individuals when we're doing this work, barriers that can lead to exclusion and burnout. And there are even risks in participation when issues trigger hate or violence. I have heard stories from people from boards who have had death threats and hate mail and been hounded on social media because of the things we're saying about physician accountability. And imagine if you're an individual working out of your bedroom and you're dealing with that, not the same as if you're working for a big institution with a legal team. Yet, as individuals, we have power, and I get kind of excited by that. Mark Yessian, who also won the Shimberg Award, the very first one, I believe, in 2004, said it really well. You have more influence than you think by asking hard questions. And if there's one thing I've learned during my service at ABMS, it is that we can really change something by asking questions in the room. So individuals stepped up to the plate until finally, we knew we had to lead together. It's a big burden to do this one person at a time. There are ways that we can lead together. We realized that we needed each other. We realized that we need to lead this change together. During my work with the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship, which I've been doing for the past 3 years, I've learned a lot about systems change and what the ingredients of that are. And what I would love to see is for our community to get together and really map it. What does it look like when we look at the big picture together and not one board at a time, not one public member at a time? But if we map the system that we're trying to improve, we understood it, if we convened a coalition of people with the intention of making sense of this, we can begin to lead it together. That leadership involves engaging people, co-creating solutions, distributing power, learning and reflecting, and adapting continuously. So to lead together with others, there are things that you can do to lead with others in a non-hierarchical, informal network. Really, we co-create and share our values and purpose, our story. That shared story really anchors the work that we do as we go in our separate worlds to enact the change we want to make. The kind of practices that we have, the sort of norms of how we do our work, and certainly our real world knowledge and lived experience. And there are things that we bring as leaders and need to bring for this to work. Trust, something I've mentioned throughout, that can mean psychological safety, mutual respect, and mutual support. It means humility, the openness and curiosity that we need, not the formal authority to be change leaders. To be driven by equity, those principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. To be willing collaborators, the skills to deal with different kinds of personalities and behaviors and conflict styles. A commitment to well-being together, helping ourselves to avoid burnout and to thrive through our relationships, even during the hard times. But the things we need to lead together as public members across the boards are more and better relationships. We need strong community. We need ways to coordinate. We need means of communication. We need structures for convening. We need resources. proper infrastructure for those whose ability and availability to participate is limited by money or their physical location, stipends, accessibility, and even physical safety, where, as I mentioned, people are dealing with some hate and abuse in the boards community. How do we rally together and protect them and get them what they need to feel safe? It's a lot. There's a history of some of this. I want to credit you, Becky, for being a big part of that. So we need to build a stronger coalition. Looking forward to the future. The thing is, public members that I know have not heard of Citizen Advocacy Center. They haven't even, dare I say it here, heard of the Institute for Credentialing Excellence. They don't know there's a public member committee that they could be part of. They might not even have time to be part of it. Yet, those are the kinds of things we need to make stronger if we're going to have power, especially as a community of individuals. So I would love to see the opportunity to take this on together. And I imagine the Public Member Committee at I.C.E. has already had some of these conversations, and you are some of these leaders. I'm not denying that. But what can we do to accelerate it and amplify it? What is the common agenda for public members more broadly and for those that aren't in this room? What can our community do to recruit more public members, more excellent public members, and train and prepare and support them? How do we harness our collective power really intentionally? Not just to train us one at a time to be on boards, but what can we do when we send out a message together and show up together? What communication tools will we use? What do we do to grow and strengthen our coalition? What does collaborative leadership look like as we, as a community, move into the future? Now, what I haven't put on this slide is, how do we raise funds? But I think we need them now. I mean, we've gone a long time working really off nothing, being volunteers, having some support from the institutions that house our work. But we might need more right now, and we might need to have a conversation about what that could look like and how to get it. So no matter what change we want to see, it really can only be done with and through and by people. And one of those people has been Art Levin. Art won the Shimberg Award in 2010, and his words resonate for me perhaps more than any other in all the lectures that I read. Art has devoted his life to consumer representation and understood that our success comes down to who we are. His message here is timeless. How we design and resource the recruitment, selection, and support of public members will determine the value of public membership. So Art is not only talking about boards and credentialing and all of this, he's talking about democracy and the power of civic participation. To be not only change makers, but active citizens in a democracy, more of us need to know how to use our power, the power of public membership, and participate in governance. So let's make space for those conversations starting now. And thank you again, Becky, for what you have given here so far. And to many of you on this call, Tom Granitor, who's been a mentor of mine, and others, for the work you've started. And I am just excited to see what the next generation can do. Thank you so much. I'm just going to switch off the slides and come back to you.
Well, Becky, you're on mute.
I need to unmute myself to say thank you for that challenging, inspiring and challenging talk. I already see one hand up. Catherine?
Thank you. I was clapping. Tara, that was a delightful lecture. Thank you so much. It was inspiring, and I like how you're pulling together a number of different thoughts and trying to connect those dots. I really do appreciate that. So I just want to say thank you. That was my clapping hand.
And
I
I
have a
want to
question
thank
in a while.
you. I want to thank you, Catherine, because I think you participated in some of the public comments that we've done in the past. So thank you.
Does anyone else have a comment or a question? I'd like to pick your mind a little bit, Tara. You posed many questions. You talked about many things that need or ought to be done in order to bolster the public member community and the whole concept of public membership and citizen participation. Do you have any answers?
To bolster it. As you heard, I mean, I like to think big, and I know there's a gap between thoughts and being pragmatic, but I would love to have conversations with the big foundations again, as one way of answering your question, and to say, what can they do to inject some funding that will allow us to build an infrastructure to do our work together on the scale that I'm talking about? Because I know it's happening on local scale, if you like, even in this call. But where is the movement? The movement to me doesn't feel that strong right now. And it could be, it should be. This is so important, even to the public, once they understand it. So I'm sad that foundations have pulled back a little from funding consumer advocacy work. And I mean, I'm prepared to team up with any of you to start the conversation again with their leaders.
Good. Grady, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And thank you also, Tara, for that great and inspirational speech. As I was listening, I was struck by how similar that many of your topics were to conversations that we have had around the table with I.C.E, the newly formed organization that's the International Society for the Advancement of Continuing Competence. Several members of the board of directors on this call. I'll call out Becky and Tom and Catherine. And it's inspiring to me that so many of the touch points you had in your speech were things that we have been thinking about and talking about. So I would like to invite myself to have a conversation with you later, if I might, to talk about some ways we could maybe engage some of these ideas, principles. It's exactly where we're headed, we hope, with I.C.E, and we're just getting off the ground, but I think we have so much in common. I would love to discuss that further.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on I.C.E. I think that sends a message to me when people are having the same conversation in different places, that is movement building. That's the history of movement building. When you're all having these similar conversations and telling similar stories, and then you find that out, and it is this distributed network of power. And having coordination between us is the magic, right? So that we can give each other advice and team up and help each other when we need to. So thank you for that, Grady.
Mark?
Thanks, Becky. And thanks, Tara. I really appreciated the sort of walk down memory lane to see that this isn't new stuff. This is stuff people have been committed to for a long period of time. We have a great legacy. And that's something that I don't think all of us knew before your talk today, to just go back through and thank you for doing the homework of reading every single Shimberg lecture. My question is, I think there is a challenge in finding new advocates. And I think oftentimes, you talked about burnout, you mentioned it several times, and I think that many of us may continue to be involved because we don't know who else is going to pick up the torch. And so any thoughts or directions you might have in that regard?
Well, thank you for everything you've clearly done over time. The first point I want to make before I answer the second part of your question is, you're so right about you know, it not being new. And these talks, and I did read all 20 of them more than once, and it was fun. They deserve to be more out there. I think they do tell an incredible social history. But the themes haven't really changed over 20 years, right? So the themes of transparency and accountability and good governance, patient safety, conflicts of interest, healthcare reform, they've all repeated themselves for 50 years in different ways. I think what's new, though, newer, anti-racism, equity, technology. There are some things that are have been rolling onto our agenda and risen to the top, that really matter, and but they haven't that doesn't mean the other things have gone away. It's just a new lens to see those things through. And that's my first point. The second, about the generations and burnout. I learned this phrase, I think I might have used it on a webinar here before, but passion exploitation. That's a phrase that is coming up among younger advocates, and a sense that unpaid labor is unjust. And that's not the grand tradition of volunteerism, but the grand tradition of volunteerism tended to be white and privileged. So I think we do have to have a rethink and kind of absolutely appreciate the people that have given so much for a lot of their careers, our careers, but also say, what do we do to break down those barriers and like make it possible for just participation? And to be vulgar, one of those things is money. And people need enough to feel valued and to be able to give value. It's not about suddenly commercializing and professionalizing this in some extreme way. That's a barrier. Because people now, younger people do live in a really insecure world. Like, they're hanging on for dear life to their jobs. They don't know if they have retirement funds. There's a lot that's sort of changed for a lot of people, yet those people are the people that would be brilliant on our boards and need to be there. So I think that's part of it, is like thinking about how to represent value. It could also be about reframing the story around some of what I said around democracy and governance and our civic participation. There are great movements going on. Vote ER is one of them, around civic participation in voting and getting young people to vote by asking them healthcare providers to register them to vote, which is an incredible movement. There's energy there because it resonates. But the work of boards often doesn't. It's a very mysterious language that it's a barrier in itself. And that I found that even in being interviewed to be on boards, people expect me to know this language already. And we need to have a different way of inviting people in using different language. It will work. You don't have to use all these long professionalism words. Those, you just translate them into words that mean something for people. And then I think that we can get people in by telling the story in a different way. And the impact that they will have. I mean, our impact is so deep. Some of those people that have won the Shimberg Award before have done world-changing things. But you wouldn't guess that some of that happened because people were on licensing boards.
Right. Nancy, I see that, but Nancy Alawalia and Ruth Horowitz both have their hands up. Nancy, you go first, and then Ruth.
One of the things that I think that organizations can do, funding is one thing, paying people to volunteer, that has all kinds of things involved. But one of the most powerful observation I made working with volunteer committees was when their organizations gave them time. And they didn't expect them to do everything on Saturday and Sunday. That, therefore, it's just one of those extra resources. It's not just money. It is And time is such a precious commodity. I look at my 3 children who are 38, 42, and 46 at the moment, and they have young families and full-time jobs, and asking them to volunteer for a half hour in their kids' schools is troubling. It's just there, you know, the support to let them go do that is often very absent. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think one of the challenges I brought up where people in my role as a public member now tend to be individuals rather than coming from Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports, I was allowed to do that. I could go for days and days and testify and show up at committees and whatever. And it was in conferences, it was my job. But now when these individuals, even on the ABMS board that I know, they run their own businesses, they work, you know, they're in private practice law, they're doing all these things where there's an opportunity cost for them. And so the time is much harder to negotiate. Or they're lower income people that, you know, don't have the privilege of an employer that gives them time off or so on. So it is a bit of a rethink, but you're right, time is the shorthand for a lot of what we're dealing with right now.
Ruth, nice to see you, Ruth.
Thank you so much for a really interesting talk. And I think I actually attended most of those talks in the past. And there are 2 kinds of levels that, I mean, we're talking about a macro, but I would call a macro level, the problems of developing an organization and communication to network public members on a variety of different boards again, and getting some resources to be able to encourage that. And I was just thinking about the inclusion and diversity issue, that what we need to do is saying, we're also, as public members on these professional organization boards, we're diversity in that sense, and bringing a separate discourse into the process. So that's one thing. Then the other thing, we're talking about Zoom and having all these meetings. Well, most of us are on a similar page here. So we can kind of talk about what our issues are. But when you're a public member and you've never met the people face to face in an interactive setting, it is really difficult. And I've been, as Becky knows, I've been involved in this since I think CAC's 2nd or 3rd national meeting. And, you know, it's in the past, it was like, well, you went out to lunch together. And so you could kind of get a feeling for what other people are thinking about. But on Zoom, you don't go out to lunch with people and chit chat, so you can't figure out. And I mean, I've had what I would call, even though I think I'm a reasonably skilled public member, I've had not very good experiences in my last 2 committees that I have been the public member on, in part because I just didn't have any of that, you know, informal interaction. So I think that that's an issue that has to be dealt with, because it's much harder to intervene when you're in a formal setting and raising your hand and that kind of thing, to ask what you think of, or, you know, I'm an ethnographer, a sociologist, and I always ask the dumb questions. And I usually do it intentionally, not all the time, but it's really hard to do that on this kind of formal photograph of yourself. And so I think we have to think that's an issue that we really have to think about in terms of participation. And those are just a few. I have some other thoughts, but I'll let other people raise some issues that are really important. I really want to thank you. It was a great talk.
Thank you, Ruth. And I agree about relationships. I mean, that was on my second last slide, and convening. And if as a community, how can we fund convenings that we can go to get to know each other informally, And yes, there are some issues with time, which I talked about before, but I would love to get to know you face to face. I would love to get to know the public members of the boards that are on the American Board of Medical Specialties face to face. And I've only met 5 of those people face to face, and there's dozens of them. I think Amy Gibson is on this call and is working as we speak to try and improve those opportunities. I wanted to improve those opportunities when I was on the board, but because of my own time constraints, I couldn't do that. And we need, there's travel funding and space and logistics. It's very expensive, but so worthwhile. And also accessibility. So things that are very local are great. I'm curious, what about all the public members that live in New York City, even if we're on different boards? How could we get together? Are you in New York City? I'll see you tomorrow. I'm in New York City.
Washington Square.
Okay, I'm 30 minutes from you. So there you go. There are these relationships, and Zoom as well, because that's the most convenient for people who may need to stay closer to home or whatever. But let's keep thinking about how we can make that happen.
I know Catherine has her hand up, but I want to just intercede at this point because it's relevant. I want to give I.C.E. a shout out for providing a forum for public members to get together and devoting resources and waiving the registration fee for public members to attend the annual meeting. And as an institution, they can't do the entire job, but I just want to give them credit for being on, making motions in the right direction on all of this. Anyway, Catherine.
Thank you, and great call out to I.C.E. I fully agree with that. I wanted to accept your invitation, Tara, to think about where people are working and trying to make those connections, because in my experience, and my kids are at the younger end, they're just finishing up college, one's still in college. They do a lot of volunteering. Their colleagues do a lot of volunteering. It's been part of their school education throughout, grammar school, high school. They volunteer at libraries, LGBTQ centers, environmental issues, reproductive right issues, gun violence in schools. Like, there are so many things that they do care about. Definitely licensing boards are not high on the list, even though I talk about them. But I wanted to, also tap into your comment about humility, and maybe it'd be valuable to do some listening tours of where people are engaged. Some of these things probably aren't getting counted on the traditional ways of how volunteerism was being counted, but the younger people are doing a lot of work around causes that they care about. And I think some of the values definitely overlap and are connected. So I just want to express that interest in maybe listening to where people are interested and where they are committing their time and energy. And it might be done on very different forums than meeting for lunch in New York City. I mean, they use social media in a very different way, but they are connected in a way, and they are passionate about things, and they are still finding time to do those things. So I think that's worth listening to and finding the connections, connecting those dots to build a larger and broader enterprise or coalition, however we want to call it, to continue this work. I think it's really important, but I think there is work being done that we might not be aware of the connections.
You've made me think that often several of the issues you named, whether it was LGBT rights, reproductive rights, others, there are things that we can do through our public membership of boards to protect and center some of these things and some of these populations. And that's part of the reframing of the story that we could come up with, is to say, if you want to have an impact, we've had important conversations at ABMS about how we're going to handle legislative interference in reproductive rights, whether we're going to make a statement about transgender care, whether we're going to work on any of the things you just mentioned, because they impact health equity. They are a matter of human rights. They are a matter of what doctors touch. And so it's interesting to think, even to say at a college that has an office that helps place people in volunteer work, is there room for youth to be part of a board? in service of something they care about.
Good ideas. Let's work on them together. Thank you.
I think, Gary, did you put up your hand? Or are you just waving? You
You're
might be
muted,
on mute.
Gary.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, you need to unmute
Gary,
yourself, Gary.
Unmute yourself, Gary. You're muted.
First day on a new computer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very well.
Great. Thank you. I feel that this is a wonderful diagnostic conversation with a little bit of prescription. But what I'm missing is a kind of strategic view on where do we go from here. I think there's also behind my comment a concern with generation gap. That too many of us represent a different generation and are not translating as effectively as our speaker is into the framework of the current generation. If I were czar, I would make this case to the Academy of Medicine and try to convince the Academy, through ABMS perhaps, that they need to undertake an institutionalized based initiative to understand what these issues are you've described so well. We lack an institutional base for this movement. It is wandering out there among personalities and friends and colleagues, but there is no firm operational or strategic perspective from which to operate. And I think the Academy in its current style is very well set to do something in this space. Be a convener, put together a strategic plan through the workshop process, and so on.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have a Brookings with its continual commitment to a number of exploratory areas. We don't have the philanthropy base at Notre Dame. This is all sort of wandering around there, so much contingent on our personalities. It's not enough in today's environment. I would go to the Academy president, sit down and have a face-to-face talk.
That's fantastic. I don't know if any of you were on the Academy of Medicine workshop yesterday around burnout among healthcare professionals. They not only did the convening and the research and the report and recommendations, but they actually have an action plan behind it that they're helping implement with the National Day of Wellbeing, Healthcare Professional Wellbeing next week, and lots of activities. And what I like about that is it isn't just a flat report or a grand meeting in Washington, but there's actually activity distributed. And one thing that has changed in advocacy over the decades is this distributed thing, like social media has really taken us there, is that there is less of an institutional base for almost anything now. But through networks, we can still be coordinated, less hierarchical, less formal, less driven by a strategic plan that's written down, but moving in the right direction intentionally together and in coordination with one another. But my point about, and yes, my talk wasn't that strategic, but that was part of the intentionality of that is in the world of co-creation and equity, no one person should like put together a strategy, right? It's co-created with the community of people who are participating in or impacted by the work. So I think that we can have a strategy, but it's not, I'm not entitled to write that by myself, but I can call people together and say, let's have the conversation around the shared vision, the shared story, the ideas like yours. And that's how we make the strategy. We might be out of conversation, Becky, and we're about up at the top of our hour.
Do you have thoughts about how to convene such a
Are you-
conversation?
For the conversation that we can continue to have.
Yes, we could continue to have it through the public member committee within I.C.E., but I think it needs to be broader than that. Well, we need to
I'm
think.
thinking, yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to make, to honor the thing I said about burnout time, I don't want to volunteer on the spot to lead the follow-up, but let's talk, maybe you and I, and 3 or 4 of us can talk about what that could look like. And I mean, even a small grant from an institution that would give us a few tens of thousands of pounds to spend, of dollars, to spend the time writing a 2-page vision statement and what we could do. I think that would be a good step. And to talk to our communities and to think a little bit more widely about who our community is. And it isn't so literally the list of names who are members of boards, public members of boards, but public citizen advocates, patient advocates everywhere. The kinds of categories I named earlier. There's this whole community that we're not tapping into. So I think even informally, we can just start talking more. And that's often how change starts, is through conversations. One-on-one conversations. Count Isaac in as well, noted.
Yeah, yes. And Tom has volunteered. And anyone else who's interested, you know how to get in touch with us. Well, we are at 10:57 where I am, I guess 1:57 where many of you are.
Zeno has a hand up.
Oh, Zeno has his hand up? I didn't see that. I'm sorry. Zeno?
Not a problem. I also want to add my kudos to you, Tara, for this wonderfully challenging lecture today. And actually, you and Becky were just chatting about what I was going to bring up, and that is the difficulty of trying to bring together public members. Certainly, this forum that is provided to us through the good graces of I.C.E. provides one forum for bringing public members together. And over the years, having served on a number of state boards, I also have experienced the difficulty of trying to pull together public members on similar boards across the 50 states and the territories, Washington, D.C. So it is a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that is worth pursuing. I'm particularly intrigued by your idea to try to get grant funding to do so. And certainly, while getting funding is not a guarantee of the outcome, it certainly would be a start to try to expand the activities that have been begun here on this public member network call. So again, thanks so much for your words today.
Thank you for your comments.
Well, thank you very much, Tara. And you certainly inspired a lot of comments and questions from the group. And thanks to everybody who contributed to the conversation. It's been inspiring, it's been challenging, and hopefully we can move on from here. And I guess we need to close unless there's anybody else in the group who has something that they must say. Thank you, Tara, very, very much.
Well, thank you all for being here. I look forward to the next conversation. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.